On our book review feature this morning, we climb onto the roller coaster of funny, tear-jerking at times and remarkable collection of stories recalled by author Razina Theba. Titled A Home on Vorster Street, Razina takes us back to her childhood where she details some of the memories of growing up in a tiny family flat on Vorster Street in Fordsburg. To share more on these tales, Razina joins us now via Zoom. Razina, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for having me.
Now, just take us back to your memories of growing up in Fordsburg in that tiny flat on Vorster Street that haunted you into sharing it through this book.
Well, I think mainly I wanted to write something for my children, something that would show them the difference between my childhood and theirs. And so these are stories about people who raised me in a community in Fordsburg.
And apartheid, I understand, played a huge part in your childhood and the world history, and the whole history of Fordsburg. Do share with us some of that history as you detail it in the book.
Well, I particularly didn't want to write a memoir that sort of repeated a history lesson. I wanted to write about the ways in which apartheid sort of crept into our lives. It was about the food we ate. It was the places we schooled at. And that is mainly, what comes out in the family stories.
And you say that it was in this tight-knit community of Fordsburg where you learned family love, values, be it from your own extended family, neighbors and friends. Yeah? Tell us more about this, Razina.
Well, I just find that, sort of in the 70s and 80s, the community was incredibly colorful. They were facing a lot of challenges, but they managed to make sense of life in a way that we don't seem to make sense of life anymore. And I look at my own children, and thankfully things have changed for them, but they miss out on the richness of a community. And so I recalled people who have passed on, and I dedicated a chapter to each of them. And that's sort of amalgamated into a memoir.
And when you say that today's children are now missing out on the richness of community, what exactly in particular that they're missing out?
I think it's lessons that can be learned from being raised in an extended family. Lessons that can be learned about their history that they seem to be missing out on, because we are very much a nuclear family.
Yes.
And, they miss out on, I think, some of the resilience that the people who raised me have demonstrated.
You're quite right there. And it's totally different. It's totally changed in nowadays, because I remember when I was growing up, every evening our grandmother would gather us around a fire and start telling us tales and stories. And now none of that is happening, in this present day and age. And after completing writing this book, Razina, you decided to go back to the yard in Fordsburg after 25 years. Tell us more about what that experience was like for you.
Well, that was actually a misunderstanding. The publisher said to me they think that the book needs to end at Vorster Street. And I understood them literally. And I went to go and have a look at what is happening there. And I was surprised to see a group of immigrants that were very much my grandparents many, many years ago, and a community and children playing in the yard. So, I was pleasantly surprised that in some sense that physical space is still occupied by a community, by children like my cousins and I. So that was interesting, and it made the epilogue one of the easiest parts to write.
Now, Razina, just take us through the process of writing this book and how you decided on some of the stories to share for this book.
Well, I had no idea that it would become a memoir. I had some time to kill, and so I started writing stories about people who had passed. And as the stories became more and more, eventually I had about 15 stories. And a friend of mine said to me, "You do realize you have a book here." And so I submitted it to a publisher. And initially, I thought it would be a lovely gift for my sons because they pay very little attention to me when I talk about these things. But these are stories that were passed down to me from my grandparents and uncles and aunts. And I thought if I put it into a book or into a collection, they will refer to it someday. And that's where the idea of a memoir comes from.
Yeah, and you say that even though this book is about one particular family, it's quite relatable because of the extended families and the villages that most of us grew up in or come from, yeah?
Yeah, I think that is sort of the most feedback I'm getting, that most people can relate to this kind of a lifestyle and what the challenges were in the 60s and 70s and going on to the 80s. So the way that I wrote the memoir is so that I can sort of in each story draw a contrast between my life now and what I was faced with in the 70s and 80s and kind of have my kids look at that and see the contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from a personal perspective, Razina, what are some of the values, that were imparted in you when you were growing up, the values that you would love to impart on your children and just about any other children growing up in this modern day era?
I think patience is a very big one.
Okay. Okay.
Patience is a big one because, I find my children are used to quick fixes. Something's broken, you throw it away. Just to show them the kind of patience we had to exercise in those days.
Okay. And of all the stories of your childhood contained in this book, which ones would you say stands out for you as the favorite to tell your children?
I think it is chapter 2, which is the trip to Mozambique. It's funny, I think. And it kind of showcases my parents the best because they were in their 40s when we took that trip to Mozambique. So my children get a chance to see what their grandparents were like when they were much younger.
Okay. And what feedback have you been receiving from those that have read the book, especially the characters who have been a part of your life and are mentioned in this book?
Well, the family has been wonderful. I mean, they've been very kind to allow me to share these stories and very gracious. And I think I was very careful about showcasing the family in a way that showed the best of us, because families are families. And I was not going to write that book, but the thing is, I think I've shown the best of who we can be.
Just going through some of the pages of your book, Razina, I get the sense that family values is the basic tenet or is the cornerstone or the foundation of this book, and the importance of family values. Just in comparison to when you were growing up to now, how do we fare in terms of instilling and imparting basic family values on our children?
I think everyone is doing the best we can. I think everyone does the best we can with the circumstances we find ourselves in. It would be difficult for me to say that, people valued honesty more when I was growing up. That would be untrue. But I do think that kids are faced with bigger challenges, and it's unfair to expect them to aspire to a lifestyle when it's not the lifestyle they find themselves in. I think more than anything, I wanted to capture a piece of my history for families of Indian origin, for families who are grandchildren of immigrants, and perhaps have something to look at and understand, because it's just difficult to get kids' attention because we are competing with amazing technology. So the idea of putting it into a book made sense for me. I'm hoping when they're in their 40s, they appreciate it a little bit more.
Right, we hope so too. And how do you get a copy of this book, Razina?
It's available at retail stores, exclusive books, and it's available online and at Love Books in Johannesburg.
Beautiful, marvelous read it is. Thank you so much for joining us, Razina.
Thank you.
All right, great stuff. Do have a great day now. That is our Sunday morning guest author, Razina Theba, and we're just in conversation with her about her recently published memoir titled A Home on Vorster Street.